And we have with us also a member of the German Parliament, the Bundestag member Grubel, who is here with his translator. We have with us our very dear friend of the conference who is coming to us regularly to join us, to speak to us, the appointee of the European Commission regarding anti-Semitism, fighting anti-Semitism, Mrs. Katharina von Schnurbein. And yeah, let's welcome our good friend Katharina. And we have with us, I must say that our friend, Mr. Shimon Cohen from Schrieta, UK, and working with the CER for many, many years, looks a little bit different because it's the Omer period. So, but it is actually Shimon Cohen who is here. It is him. So welcome to all of you. The topics today of our panel will be freedom of religion, topics, issues, and freedom of religion. We decided to have our convention, our 31st convention, in Antwerp, not in Brussels, but in Antwerp because it's part of the Flanders region, which not long ago outlawed shechita, the Jewish way to kill animals. And it is no secret that one of the greatest concerns of the Jewish community in Europe is the fact that more and more countries in Europe are about to legislate new laws which will make life for Jews who would like to observe Judaism more and more difficult. So I would like to start with the first question with, again, with the far right, with Chief Rabbi Mervis, who is actually still part of Europe. We're still before Brexit. And I would like to hear from our esteemed and very dear Chief Rabbi. Chief Rabbi Mervis, to what extent do you think does these new laws, if legislated against Shechita, against Milah, to what extent will this impact the Jewish future in Europe? Chief Rabbi.
To speak here or there?
No, there. You can.
Okay.
The way we're going to manage the panel, I'm going to ask a question to each panelist, and then we're going to open questions to the floor.
Okay. So thank you very much, Chief Rabbi Goldschmidt, and good evening to my fellow panelists. And perhaps a very quick word before I answer that question. It's just about the fact that I'm seeing that we have two conferences going on. There's the real conference, and there's the conference that is being published in the media. From what we're reading in the media about this conference, you could easily call this the conference of European anti-Semitism. However, the reality, as all of us know, is, yes, we're dealing with anti-Semitism. In this session, we're dealing with freedom of religion. But we're also dealing with wonderful success and great news stories from European centers. I would say that there are two parallel narratives happening in Europe right now. And that is that the good is getting better and the bad is getting worse. And while we are concentrating during this session on the bad getting worse, Baruch Hashem, as we all know, there are also some wonderful stories happening, and the good is definitely getting better. I have participated in conferences of European rabbis since 1984, and I have personally witnessed the most incredible, miraculous expansion of Jewish life in Europe during that time, and we are here not only in a state of desperation, but also in a state of celebration. Having said that, if Milah or Shechita are proscribed in any one single country in Europe, it has a direct domino effect on the whole of Europe, and I would go beyond that, on the whole of the world. And that is why we care enormously. We cared about what happened in Iceland with regard to Milah. It was given top priority within rabbinic and lay circles. And thank God we were able to overcome that decree there. And that is why, sitting here in Flanders, we take the prohibition of Shechita exceptionally seriously. It is something of enormous importance to us, our freedom to act according to our religion, the extent to which we feel at home and comfortable within a society which can take a step of that nature. And I'm pleased that we are here in order to make that very strong point. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Rabbi. Bundestag Member Gubel, I welcome you here. Ich möchte Sie herzlich willkommen heißen. Thank you very much for coming. I wanted to ask you, as a European legislator, as a legislator in the Bundestag, talking to people of your party, of other parties, and I understand that those questions of, do we want Jews in Europe? We hear from a lot of politicians that Europe without Jews is not Europe. We hear this from politicians in Germany, politicians in France. But do politicians in your party and your country realize that if this legislation against Jewish practice is going to go forward, it is another way of saying the Jews are not welcome in our country?
Ja, danke für die Frage. Ich möchte... Speak German, okay?
I was told that there will be simultaneous interpretation from German into Ivrit.
Yeah, but so we're all going to need not everyone, Gadi, not everyone has. We'll hear also your translation. Okay, sir. Sir.
Ja, also danke für die Frage. Ich möchte zunächst mal sagen, und das ist ein Teil der Antwort, dass ich nicht nur Abgeordneter des Deutschen Bundestages bin, sondern auch eine Funktion in der Bundesregierung habe, die letztes Jahr neu eingerichtet wurde, nämlich Beauftragter der Bundesregierung für weltweite Religionsfreiheit. Wir haben zusätzlich in der Bundesregierung die Funktion geschaffen mit einem Beamten, Beauftragter für jüdisches Leben und für den Kampf gegen Antisemitismus. Wir haben also jetzt in der Bundesregierung zwei Funktionen, die sich um religiöses Leben, Religionsfreiheit kümmern. Und wir hatten schon einen vergleichbaren Fall, das war die Frage der Beschneidung, wo ein Landgericht gesagt hat, es sei Körperverletzung und Eingriff in die körperliche Unversehrtheit, wenn ein Kind beschnitten wird. Und wir als Politik, als Bundestag, und ich war damals noch für Familienpolitik verantwortlich, haben eine neue Regelung in das bürgerliche Gesetzbuch geschrieben, das die Beschneidung des männlichen Kindes erlaubt und die Verfassungsfrage, nämlich körperliche Unversehrtheit, Gesundheitsschutz und Religionsfreiheit versucht, schonend auszugleichen, indem gesagt wurde, es muss besonders ausgebildetes Personal sein und hygienisch einwandfrei zugehen bis zum 6. Monat und später müsste dann ein Vertreter, ein Arzt oder medizinisches Fachpersonal, zum Beispiel bei Muslimen, die Beschneidung vornehmen. Und ähnlich haben wir auch im Tierschutzgesetz eine Regelung, die grundsätzlich das betäubungslose Schlachten verbietet, aber eine Ausnahme für Juden und Muslime, die aus religiösen Gründen geschächtete Tiere verzehren, eine Ausnahme reingenommen.
So thank you very much for this question. I would like to start out by explaining that I am not just a member of the German Parliament. I also have a position within the German government, which was newly created last year. I am the Federal Government Commissioner for Global Freedom of Religion. And in the German government, we also created the position of a Federal Government Commissioner for Jewish Life in Germany and the fight against anti-Semitism. So there are two positions in the German government dealing with religious life and freedom of religion. We had a similar case to what you mentioned a few years ago when a German district court ruled that circumcision amounted to bodily injury. And at the time, I was still responsible for family policy, and we made a change to our civil code saying that circumcision would be legal, and we tried to strike a balance between the need of our Constitution for freedom of religion and the need for physical integrity of all persons by saying that circumcision had to be done by a properly trained person under hygienic condition up to the 6th month of the child, or if it was done at a later stage, for instance with Muslims, a doctor would have to do it. And in a similar way, we changed our animal welfare legislation, saying that in principle, slaughtering without any stunning or anesthesia was banned. However, for Jews and Muslims who needed to eat traditionally slaughtered meat for religious reasons, we made an exception, making sure that this would still be possible.
Was das Schächten angeht, haben wir eine Herausforderung. In unsere Verfassung neu eingefügt wurde das Staatsziel Tierschutz. Und daraus argumentieren einige, dass jetzt eine Verfassungsvorschrift Tierschutz mit der Verfassungsvorschrift Religionsfreiheit auf gleicher Ebene miteinander streiten. Bislang haben wir dazu keine Initiativen, dass sich was ändert. Allerdings viele Tierschutzorganisationen kritisieren das aktuelle Recht und wir argumentieren von der Bundesregierung aktuell mit Religionsfreiheit und sagen, für diese Gruppe der Juden und der Muslime muss das Schächten weiter möglich sein.
Regarding slaughter, one challenge we are facing is that a few years ago in our Constitution, animal welfare was introduced as a government or state goal. And now some are arguing that now you have a conflict between two equal constitutional rights, namely the right to animal welfare and the right to freedom of religion. But so far, we have not taken any initiative to make any changes here. However, we have numerous animal rights organizations that are criticizing the current situation, but in the German government we have been arguing that freedom of religion is going to prevail.
Thank you very much. So yes, actually we remember Germany in 2012 when there was the Beschneidungsdebate, the circumcision debate, and actually Chancellor Merkel took all the parties together and embedded into the basic law of Germany the issue of freedom of religion. And that's the reason I think this was the end of the debate. Now my question to you, Mrs. von Schnurbein, from your view from Brussels, you just heard from, I would say, your German colleague, yeah, Germany has no problem. Germany took care of the problem. But you know as well as we know that many of the initiatives on slaughtering and circumcision has nothing to do with children and has nothing to do with animals. It has to do with immigration. These are basically anti-immigration measures actually directed against the Muslim immigration, and we Jews are the collateral damage, meaning, in other words, there is some element of anti-Semitism in these law proposals as well. So the question I would like to ask, when we ask that if we're talking about human rights and freedom of religion, and freedom of religion is one of the basics of the European Union when the European Union was created. And when we asked during our last visit in the European Parliament and with experts, and they asked, oh, that's not something up to us. Okay, we have Measure 1099, but that's something, there's a Ländersache, that these are issues which are decided in each country. The question I'm asking, I hear a lot of times from EU leaders, Europe without Jews is not Europe. I know you're doing a lot fighting anti-Semitism in the social media and bringing the leaders of social media to task for what is happening on social media. Don't you think that the time has come to do something about these issues as well, that the EU should get more involved speaking to lawmakers in the different countries, whether it's Scandinavia, in Poland, or here in Belgium, and tell them, listen, if you pass these kind of laws, this is the message which you're giving to the faith community, especially to the Jewish community.
Okay. Shalom, Erev Tov. It's a pleasure to be here again. And of course, your question is multifaceted and goes in many directions and makes many presumptions that I think I need to challenge to some extent. Namely, I don't think that these laws in themselves, in their intention, are anti-Semitic. I think that they make life for Jews difficult in their consequences. And that needs to be distinguished. That is not to excuse anything. We at the European Commission, we've been very clear that freedom of religion and belief is a fundamental value that applies to everybody, and therefore also to the Jewish community, and especially, indeed, as you say, when Europe without Jews would not be Europe anymore. So that's very clear. On the other hand, we have legislation, and that legislation is, as you described, and I think we've been in dialogue about this certainly since 2012 or so, because legislation is passed by the 28 member states, and once it is passed, it applies, and that is true for all laws. They can be changed, of course, but at the moment we have a situation where in European legislation, unstunned slaughtering is prohibited unless the member state makes an exemption for religious reasons, as Germany has done, as many other countries have done. Now, we have voiced our concern whenever we see that member states do not grant these exceptions, but it is indeed a decision of the state. And, it's the member states that decide that, and it's very delicate, actually, for the European Commission to encroach on such competences. So I know it's not the answer you want to hear, but it is, we have to see that rule of law in other areas serves also the purpose. Yeah? Now, for example, in December, the European Council passed a declaration on anti-Semitism by unanimity, the first one ever, where it recommends the adoption of the CER definition to the member states, where we talk about education, about Holocaust remembrance, about law enforcement agencies, and all the different areas where we need action in order to address anti-Semitism. But we have to accept that, for example, in this case, it will serve well that we have passed this declaration by unanimity, and that we can now follow up on it by bringing the member states together and ensure, together with the Jewish communities, that this will be implemented. By the way, we are having the first meeting together between member states representatives, 2 member states representatives from each country, and a representative of a national Jewish community to discuss different aspects of this declaration. The first meeting will be on security on the 20th of June. And we hope that by creating this dialogue, while it exists in many member states, it doesn't exist in all, we can actually make tangible change for the Jewish community. The next meeting will then be on education and on Holocaust remembrance, and then we'll have another one on the CER definition and data collection. And we hope that by bringing member states together in this way and allowing for a dialogue between the Jewish community and the member states. Member states will conclude, as they commit in this declaration, holistic strategies against anti-Semitism, and we hope that this will happen by the end of 2020. So I know the answer on the first part is not satisfactory to you. On the other hand, we are bound by certain legislation, and there are many other things that have been happening in the last 3-4 years that, in my opinion, go in the right direction. And once there will be also a change in the perception of anti-Semitism being a threat not only to the Jews, but to European democracy, I think there will probably also be a change with regards to these legal situations.
Thank you for leaving us a little bit of hope regarding these issues. That's very nice of you. Shimon, you just heard the voice of the European Commission on these issues. You know that the European Court on Human Rights took 2 landmark decisions in the recent past regarding freedom of religion. One was allowing an employer to fire an employee because the employee doesn't like the religious dress of the employee. It is especially, it touches minority religions. I don't think that an employer in Europe is going to fire an employee because the employee wears a cross. It was actually an employee who was wearing a head covering, a woman, and she was not Jewish. The other court decision regarding fighting the French Ministry of Agriculture, saying that slaughtered meat according to halal or kosher provisions cannot be defined as organic as bio meat. Where do you see this is going? Do you think there is now, actually now, the issue in Belgium is in front of the European Court? Do minority religions have any hope to get justice in front of the European Court for Human Rights?
Thank you very much. Yesterday, I was giving evidence to a committee in the British Parliament on education matters, and the chairman said to the speakers on the panel, you each have 4 to 5 minutes to present your case. One of the rabbis present misunderstood him and thought he said 45 minutes. I'll try and answer your question, not making that same mistake. I don't think actually anything's changed at all. I think that if we look at the historical context of this, we'll understand that nothing has changed. The first legal ban on Shechita came into a European country in the late 19th century, a full 25 years before any codified animal welfare legislation was extant in Europe. Therefore, the first ban on Shechita clearly had nothing whatsoever to do with animal welfare. And today it also has nothing to do with animal welfare, it has to do with population control. In the late 19th century, the Swiss government banned Shechita simply to stop Jews settling in Switzerland as they were escaping from the pogroms in Russia. And as recently as 2008, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands made it very clear that his intention to ban Shechita or ban slaughter without mechanical stunning was designed to dissuade Muslims from settling in his country. So I think nothing, frankly, has changed in terms of the landscape. What has changed, however, and something I think we're all somewhat responsible for, religion in the 21st century is seen to be outdated, irrelevant, and the sort of province of old-fashioned, rather strange people who still don't accept that Google is the god of all time. And I think we have a job and a duty to promote religion rather than defend religion. Only defend religion. We're in a very strange situation, and Rabbi Goldschmidt and I had this conversation in Denmark with the Danish politicians, and I take issue with this issue of, well, we've passed a resolution against anti-Semitism. and that protects freedom of religion. Well, actually, what it does is it protects freedom of religion in the way that you want us to practice our religion. And freedom of religion in itself isn't enough. There needs to be freedom of practice, freedom to practice religion. Prime Minister May in the United Kingdom at Christmas time in her Christmas message said that she was proud that the United Kingdom was a country where people are free to practice their faith without hindrance, a much stronger statement than there is freedom of religion. So statements of, we're opposed to anti-Semitism whilst we're restricting Jewish life means that we like Jews in our country as long as they live the way that we live. But if they live differently, that becomes a problem. So I think that we need to take responsibility for that. We spend far too much time giving credence to this debate about animal welfare. I make a policy that I won't debate on the other side of an animal welfare group in an animal welfare debate, because I am on the same side as animal welfare. It's not too arrogant to say that Jews invented the concept of animal welfare. And we are very concerned about all these issues, which is why we were at the forefront of promoting CCTV in abattoirs. The training of Shochtim goes far and above the training of other slaughtermen. And we need to focus on these issues rather than solely on the last 2 seconds of animals' life. We're in a very strange world at the moment where speciesism seems to be what's being talked about, in that animals and humans have a parity, and there is no longer any hierarchy of species. And this causes us a great problem, which is why we need to be focusing on the halachas of animal welfare, and those are the real issues that we need to be fighting today. I think that we should pay tribute to the European Commission, because shechita is essentially protected under various guidelines, and particularly Directive 1099, which protects the right of countries, should they wish, for shechita and halal. But we have a responsibility which we take very seriously, which is to ensure that we do it properly, and we do it under guidance, and we do it under license. We have problems in Muslim communities where it isn't the same thing. They don't have the same body of halacha as we have, and their rules are very lax and very different. Furthermore, we don't flood the market with kosher food, kosher meat. It's effectively a slaughter-to-order process, which is we slaughter our meat for our people, which is essentially what the legislation in most countries allows us to do. But when you have a country that decides internally it is going to vote on this issue, we have had far too many experiences, in my opinion, where we've screamed anti-Semitism rather than addressing the issues. In Poland recently, I don't know if Chief Rabbi Shudrich is here, we addressed the issues and we overturned both parliamentary and legal enactments because we focused on issues relating to animal welfare. In Belgium that wasn't the case, and it still remains a big problem in Belgium, and we can't escape from that. So I think overall, in summary, our responsibility is to face these challenges head on by promoting the good that religion does in society, because let's not lose sight of the fact that we're living in probably the most religious century for centuries, in that the debate everywhere is about religion. Unfortunately, it's negative. It's about Islamism, it's about terrorism, it's about issues relating to abuse in churches and what have you. And frankly, as a PR man, I would say that religion has a very bad reputation in the 21st century, and that's our responsibility to do something about it.
Thank you, Shimon. You have not, I guess, regarding the European Court of Human Rights?
Well, we can't argue with the European Court of Human Rights. I mean, the European Court of Human Rights has made these decisions, but it's against a backdrop that we have to understand. To my mind, it is pretty ludicrous that the European Court of Human Rights can legislate about what people can and cannot wear. It's not about their dress. It is clearly about the place of religion in 21st century society. We can't go backwards on that European Court regulation. What we have to do is promote the benefits of religion and give people less cause to take issues like religious dress to the European Court.
I just would like to interrupt you. I just would like to say goodbye to Mrs. Katharina von Schnurbein. Thank you so much for coming. She has to leave to Luxembourg. And thank you so much for coming, and welcome again at our conference. So, yes, Shimon, you were in the middle.
No, look, the European Court legislated on these issues. It was very unfortunate that it legislated on these issues. We can't undo that. But what we do have to do is within our own territories, there is a responsibility upon religious leaders to promote the benefits of religion in modern day society and to recognize that a ruling against a woman wearing a hijab is against society. It's not against a particular religion, it's against a people place in society. I mean, many of you are aware of my involvement with FIFA, and one of the positive things I can say about FIFA is that they actually legislated that women were allowed to wear hijabs to play football, which was a huge change, and it allowed many of the Muslim countries the opportunity to take part in international competition that had hitherto been denied them.
Thank you very much. Before we take questions from the floor, I would like to ask Bundestag member Grubel, or Commissioner Grubel, you're in charge of freedom of religion issues. Germany is going to take the lead of the European Union in 2020. You heard of your former neighbor, Mrs. Katharina von Schnurbein, of what she said, what the European Union or the European Commission can do or cannot do. Do you think that Germany, I think Germany showed a beautiful example, what you did in 2012 and 2013 in terms of guaranteeing the freedom of religion and making sure that a Jewish community can stay and prosper in Germany. The question is, do you think Germany might take the lead in Europe? Europe needs leaders, and see that in the rest of Europe, Jews can live as well. Because I want to explain something which should be understood. I think in Germany you understood it, but I'm not sure they understood this in Europe. If tomorrow a country, let's take, for example, Switzerland, is going to say that circumcision is outlawed, is against the law, it means that if you have a young family in Switzerland, they're having a baby, so even if they decide to take the baby and let's go for a day to France or to Italy or to Liechtenstein and have the circumcision over there, they might break the law. So and circumcision is something which is practiced almost universally among Jews, whether they're practicing Jews or less practicing Jews. So they're going to have to decide, in order for us not to break the law, in order for us not to have a problem, we're going to have to leave. So actually a law against circumcision would make life impossible for the majority of Jews or for an organized Jewish community. Now, after listening to Mrs. von Schnurbein, who is a friend and has done a lot against anti-Semitism, I have the feeling that there is not enough understanding on the European level in many different European countries of what such a decision would mean for the future of the Jewish community. Would you see Germany taking a lead on this in the future?
Ja, also Sie haben angesprochen den Europäischen Rat 2020. Nach dem europäischen Regelwerk ist die Europäische Union nicht für alles zuständig. Viele Verantwortungen fallen in die Zuständigkeit der jeweiligen Länder. Ich möchte aber trotzdem auch im Rahmen des EU-Ratsvorsitzes ein Treffen organisieren mit den Kollegen aus den anderen europäischen Ländern zum Thema Religionsfreiheit. Und für mich ist das Thema immer auch eine Frage der Glaubwürdigkeit. Wenn wir den Umgang der Chinesen mit Uiguren, mit Christen, mit Falun Gong kritisieren, dann müssen wir auch im eigenen Land vorbildlich sein, was den Umgang mit religiösen Minderheiten angeht. Und wir als Europäer engagieren uns gegen Christenverfolgung in arabischen, muslimischen Ländern. Wir engagieren uns gegen die Verfolgung der Uiguren oder der Menschen in Nigeria, die von Boko Haram bedroht sind. Um glaubwürdig zu bleiben, müssen wir aber auch in unseren jeweiligen Ländern schauen, dass Religionsfreiheit gewährt wird. Und das ist eigentlich ein Konsens unter allen Kollegen innerhalb Europas.
You mentioned the German presidency of the European Council in 2020. Now, by European rules, not everything falls within the responsibility of the European Union. There are many things that come under the responsibility of the individual countries. However, I do want to use our EU presidency to convene a meeting of colleagues in Europe on the freedom of religion. And for me, this issue is really a matter of credibility. If we criticize the way China treats Uyghurs and Christians and Falun Gong, we have to be setting an example in the way we treat religious minorities in our countries. If we are active against the persecution of Christians in Arab and Muslim countries, the persecution of Uyghurs in China, the persecution of Christians by Boko Haram in Nigeria, then we have to take freedom of religion seriously in our own countries. And this is a consensus among the European colleagues in charge of this.
This will be a great idea, and I really think that Germany should take the lead in this, because Germany is a great example. What I did not mention yet, that after Chancellor Merkel called together the leaders of the main parties and changed the law to guarantee freedom of religion in Germany, we, the Conference of European Rabbis, we awarded Chancellor Merkel the Lord Jacobowitz Prize as a token of thanks for her support for religious freedom. Chief Rabbi Morris, England has been always a good example for Europe in terms of religious freedom. There's less separation between church and state in the United Kingdom than in the rest of Europe. There were less wars, less revolutions, and you're about to exit us and to leave Europe to some extent. Do you think that even after Brexit, the United Kingdom, which has, I would say, the most organized, not the biggest Jewish community, but the most organized Jewish community in Europe, because you had no communism and you had no Nazism in England, thanks to God. To what extent will England be able to influence the European continent in terms of issues of Judaism and religious freedom?
It's something which we're going to be finding out, and difficult to prophesy about it right now. And that's one of the reasons why the British people are finding the entire Brexit scenario so difficult to even make a decision about. And once the dust settles, then we'll see. I think a lot will also depend on which party is in government within the UK, and as everybody is aware, our Jewish community is nervous about power going over to a Labour government. Shimon correctly previously identified the tone within our societies as being something of significance. Originally, you had religious societies, and then we had religious and irreligious people. And today there is a third feature, and that is those who are anti-religious. And we have humanists who are being very vocal and who are highly respected within our countries. And the anti-religious tone is one which is corrosive and which is influencing directly not only legislation, but I would add a further dimension which we haven't yet come to in our conversation, and that is hate crime. And we are finding that today, men, women, and children who are praying in churches, in mosques, and in synagogues are on the front lines of a new global conflict. And what is influencing those who are attacking these innocent people is a tone within our societies. It is the extent to which hate thought is being articulated by hate speech, which of course is only one step away from hate crime. And in this regard, I believe that, first of all, far more prevention needs to take place. Within Britain, talking about others taking a leaf out of our book, we have an impressive setup with regard to the security that is being provided for our Jewish community, which is funded primarily by our government very impressively. And other communities, right, not just in Europe, right around the globe, would benefit from such an effective security system. And of course, it's not just protection, we need to engage in prevention, and in here I would highlight two things. The first is the role that faith leaders have. From the very top, we need to send out messages to our communities that we believe in peace and in unity, and no act against members of another faith should take place in our name and in the name of our holy books. And secondly, national leaders have an enormous responsibility here, right around the globe. National leaders need to set an example of love speech as opposed to hate speech, and should condemn outrightly all acts which go against the adherence of faiths.
Thank you very much. Okay, we are opening questions to the floor. אנחנו פותחים, נותנים אפשרות לרבנים לשאול שאלות לחברי הפאנל שנמצאים פה. אתם יכולים לשאול את השאלות או בעברית או באנגלית או בגרמנית, יתרגמו את זה. You can ask your questions whether in Hebrew, German or English. And you have microphones. You have 3 microphones here. Whoever has questions, please introduce yourself, say who you are, and also tell to whom you're addressing this question. Okay, Monsieur Ohana, allez s'il vous plaît au microphone ici. Oui, ici, devant vous. Oui. Okay.
Bonjour. Je crois alors, je m'appelle Paul Ohana et j'arrive de Paris, où je suis très engagé dans la vie publique et en particulier sur les questions d'antisémitisme.
My name is Paul Ohana. I come from Paris, very much engaged with Jewish life, anti-Semitism, and also supporting the CER.
Même si cela paraît candide, j'ai acquis récemment la conviction qu'il n'y avait pas de solution durable et à court terme au problème de l'antisémitisme. C'est peut-être dramatique à dire, mais c'est un problème avec lequel nous aurons à vivre longtemps. Vivre avec l'antisémitisme longtemps ne veut pas dire l'accepter, ne veut pas dire baisser les bras. Vivre avec l'antisémitisme veut dire l'attaquer d'une part, et surtout l'attaquer à la source. Et pour moi, le point important qui n'a pas encore été soulevé, c'est la place de l'école, la place de l'éducation dans le système de combat contre l'antisémitisme.
Mr. Ohana is saying that he has come to the conclusion that anti-Semitism is here to stay. It's a long-term struggle, and he came also to the conclusion that the key to fight anti-Semitism is education.
Donc, oui, accueillons avec plaisir toutes les offres d'aide des organismes internationaux, mais il est évident que ce n'est pas la loi qui résoudra le problème, ce sera certainement l'éducation que nous donnerons à nos enfants, l'éducation qui sera donnée dans le système public, et je crois qu'il faut voir de très près quel est le contenu des manuels, le contenu des documents qui sont remis aux enfants. Et j'en parle par expérience parce que j'ai des petits-enfants qui sont à l'école et je suis ahuri et surpris d'entendre les commentaires qui me reviennent de l'école vers la maison.
À la fin de la question, il faut demander une question. Okay.
Merci de me le rappeler.
He came to the conclusion that the answer to anti-Semitism is not the laws. You cannot legislate against anti-Semitism. The way he sees from his children and grandchildren who go to school, and the comments they're getting, it is education.
Alors, je voudrais juste pour conclure citer un exemple qui est celui de l'UNESCO, qui vient de sortir un petit opuscule sur comment combattre l'antisémitisme. Et je dois dire qu'on doit saluer avec plaisir cette initiative, mais est-ce que c'est comme cela qu'on se bat contre l'antisémitisme en publiant un petit opuscule? Donc peut-on augmenter les moyens à donner au bas du terrain pour que l'on fasse grandir des enfants qui soient plus accessibles à la vie en commun?
Il y a une question ou il n'y a pas de question?
Peut-on augmenter les moyens? Voilà,
Okay,
ma question.
UNESCO, it just published a pamphlet regarding how to fight anti-Semitism. You saw this pamphlet, but however, he's asking a question if this is the way to fight anti-Semitism.
Die UNESCO hat gerade eine schnelle Publikation rausgebracht, aber er fragt sich, ob die wirklich
Okay.
okay ist.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Yes,
Question for Shimon.
present yourself.
My name is Rabbi Daniel Friedman of Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue in London. I happen to be the rabbi of Shimon's shul. So we are various rabbis from throughout Europe. Now, Yasher Koach to you for fighting for Shrita rights and Miller rights at the highest levels, but where on the ground, can you give us just some basic talking points of why Shrita and Miller are different, why it's not, I mean, I'm going to use the extreme female mutilation. I mean, these are things that we're being faced with. How do we respond to the critics that these are not valid arguments and truly these are things that need to stand?
Sure, thank you. Look, to go into the detail now would be the wrong forum, and we should do that, and we have opportunities to do that. The answer, Rabbi Friedman, is yes, there are very clear positive arguments supported by scientific study in support of Shrita. There are very positive scientific arguments as well in support of Mila. We also need to refine and promote the religious arguments, why we do these things. And what is the benefit to them? And the very simple answer on Shrita, it's a very simple answer. It's not a practical answer, but it's a very simple answer. If before the advent of factory abattoirs, the only way in which you slaughtered animals you did on your farm, and the method used by every farmer anywhere in the world was essentially the Shrita method, with a long blade drawn across the neck of the animal. That's what you did. It's completely impractical when you're looking at factory abattoirs. The problems of Shrita in the 20s, that began really in essence in the 20th century, were because of factory abattoirs. That's the problem, and mechanical stunning and etc. was brought in, nothing to do with animal welfare. Mechanical stunning was brought in simply as a factory process to move things along. And so we have very clear, robust arguments, which I have to say we do win debate on those very clear arguments. Miller, again, is something else that we, as it's a philosophical argument going on in the political discourse. The European Convention on Human Rights gives parents huge rights over children, but much of the political discourse today, emanating from the richer northern European countries, wants to take away the right of parents and wants to make children a responsibility of the state. So as a parent, we have a responsibility for our children, and therefore we can bring them into our faith in the way in which we traditionally have done. And there are very robust arguments that allow that, give us the right to be able to do that, and very robust arguments that deal with the health issues as well. And as I mentioned in my earlier remarks, much of the argument against us, both on Mila and Shrita, has got very little to do with either children or animals, and it's a very useful thing for us to be able to do, to put the debate back onto the subject of children and animals. It's not enough detail, but we'll go into the detail again. So.
Okay, thank you. Do we have here Rabbi Hofmeister?
Right.
Okay, why don't you join us here? I don't know if all of you know Rabbi Hofmeister, the community rabbi of Vienna, who is also the president of UME, which is the United Mohalim of Europe, which is a self-regulating body and of those people who circumcise, and these are the members of this body who have the right to circumcise, and we have individual membership, and we also have the membership of national unions of France and of one of the oldest Jewish institutions in Great Britain, which is the Initiation Society. They receiving insurance, and they're being tested before they're giving the right to deal with circumcision. And a few years ago, when the Council of Europe in Strasbourg started a campaign to ban circumcision, or to say that circumcision should be banned, and there was a hearing in Strasbourg. So they bought some movies of a botched up circumcision, and I remember that the representative of the CER was Rabbi Moshe Levin, who was there. Is Rabbi Moshe here? Rabbi Moshe Levin is here. And he said, yes, this Brit Milah, this circumcision was botched up, but I want to ask a question. Was this person a member of the UME? Was this person a member of the United Mohalim of Europe? And the answer was no. Once no, okay, the person was not accredited. This is not our problem. If you're taking a shoemaker, a butcher, and asking him to be a mohel, that's your problem. That's not our problem. So we're also happy to have Rabbi Hofmeister over here. Maybe you can tell us in a few words, you speak English? Yes, some English, okay, with some nice Viennese accent. And tell us about the membership in the UME and how you're dealing with giving accreditation to the Mohalim.
So as mentioned already by Rav Pinchas, the UME is a union of qualified Mohalim all over Europe. Across Europe we have Mohalim ranging from the most eastern countries until France. We have one more in Spain even. A big issue of the whole debate on circumcision is when we don't have regulated Mohalim acting across Europe, because certain complications which can occur in any case, which are not necessarily a result of the mohels lacking qualification, will however backfire on the notion of Brit Milah as a whole, and that's why we found it very necessary to establish this union of Mohalim. We have in France, we have in the UK, established bodies of Mohalim which are affiliated with the UME. We have individual Mohalim in any other country in Europe. In order to join the UME, a mohel has to be experienced enough to receive 2 recommendations from a rabbi or a mohel who is known to us, to ascertain that really he knows what he's doing. We advise Mohalim where to get further training. There are many people around Europe who do Brit Milah, but they might not do it so often. They might have a couple of a year, but they're not really experienced in that sense. And then we can help them to further get qualifications either in the UK or in Eretz. We also supply our Mohalim, especially those in the periphery, with sterilized instruments to make sure that everything is going according to the highest standards possible, and we are not risking any attacks from with medical arguments, with hygienic arguments, and so on. And yeah, that's what we're doing.
Thank you. Shimon, you wanted to add something?
I wanted just to add, in terms of the gentleman from Paris who talked about how we can respond to these issues, and it's relating to what Rabbi Hofmeister was saying.
Paul, parle à toi.
There have always been objections to both Schreiter and Milah. The difference that we're facing now is these objections have become much more mainstream than they ever were before. And we have to ask why they've become much more mainstream. And the reason is not to do with us. The reason is that circumcision has been put into the mainstream debate because of later immigrations, Muslim immigrations primarily. And very same with Shrita. Why is it such a mainstream discussion? It's a mainstream discussion because of the numbers of Muslims who are now practicing slaughter without mechanical stunning, and thus it's become a mainstream problem. So that's the reasoning. Now, I would give some examples where we've addressed these issues properly. And I meet very regularly with some Muslim groups in the United Kingdom, the Muslim Council of Britain, and other much further to the right Muslim groups. And the point that I make to them very regularly is that we've been around in the UK for nearly 400 years, and they've just turned up. And we have institutions and structures and systems that make us very much more professional in the way in which we do things. The Chief Rabbi chairs a parliamentary statutory body called the Rabbinical Commission for the Licensing of Shoftim. It's the only country in the world where the Chief Rabbi is answerable to Parliament to license our slaughtermen. Now, that's something that was set up in 1932. We have been encouraging Muslims communities to get themselves regulated, to have systems and structures and standards that they can adhere to. If you have standards, you can then have licensing. Exactly the same with people who perform circumcisions in those communities. As Rabbi Hofmeister said, our Moalim are licensed and registered and insured and accountable, whereas in other communities they're not. And that's a problem. So the onus is on them to bring their standards up to ours, and certainly in the United Kingdom, the main Muslim groups are learning from us and want to learn from us because they realize that once you get to a professional license level on both Mila and Shrita, much of the debate can go away.
Thank you, Shimon. Any more questions? Does any members of the panel want to add something? Chief Rabbi Mervis, Commissioner Grubel, wollen Sie noch was hinzufügen? Chief Rabbi Mervis, please.
Could I ask a brief question to our German colleague, please? We've been speaking about Shrita and Mila. We're encountering in Britain today an expansion of forms of government involvement in terms of freedom of religion. Let me give you one example. In the world of education, creationism. Now, I can understand, while I don't necessarily agree, I can understand on expectations that our Department for Education has with regard to preparing our children for life in 21st century Britain ahead of them, in respect of certain elements of lifestyle and so on. But we are being told now that when we teach Breshit bara Elokim et hashmayim v'et haaretz, in the beginning God created heaven and earth, we should be teaching it as a yesh omrim, as some say. And we need to present other views. We are therefore being told how we should be raising our children. Now, what difference does that make to our children in the future with regard to 21st century Britain, their relationship with others, their responsibility as citizens? It is a direct, unacceptable imposition of a government with regard to our freedom to live a religious way of life as we see fit. How do you respond in this respect? How is this viewed in Germany, and what are your views with regard to a subject such as this in Europe?
In Deutschland ist die Zuständigkeit für den Unterricht nicht beim Bund, sondern bei den 16 Bundesländern, die ganz unterschiedlich mit solchen Themen umgehen. In den meisten Bundesländern wird Religionsunterricht an den staatlichen Schulen erteilt und die Lehrer sind angehalten, den Religionsunterricht auch parallel zu zum Beispiel Biologie oder anderen Unterrichtsstoffen abzuhalten, um so immer auch die Sicht der Religion, der unterschiedlichen Religionen auf solche Themen mit zu unterrichten. Wir haben allerdings ein Bundesland, Berlin. Berlin hat sich entschieden, den Religionsunterricht ganz aus den staatlichen Schulen herauszunehmen. Also da gibt es dann keine parallele Information, wie die Sicht der jeweiligen Religionen auf diese Themen sind.
Now in Germany, it is not the federal government that is responsible for education, but it's, school education comes under the responsibility of each of our 16 federal states, which are handling this differently. But in most federal states, religious